Hi, can anyone hear this? Seem to be waiting for Nathan and Adam at the moment. Be back in one moment.
Hey. Is it hearing good? Ash, can you hear me?
Fine.
Nathan?
Yeah.
Excellent. So shall we begin? Yeah, excellent.
That's good.
So hi, everyone. Thanks for taking the time to join us. Yeah, this is an exciting event, our pre-Genesis AMA. And we're just here to fill you in about essentially what's going to be happening and to hear any and all questions that you guys may have prior to Genesis. The first question, what made you create Zen Protocol? I think Nathan would be best to answer that.
What made us create Zen Protocol? Okay. It was seeing that there was a gap, that there was a difference between what was being claimed for blockchains and for smart contracts and what was actually possible. What we see is that there is a lot of talk about doing everything on a blockchain or having various automatic transfers and so on, but the security isn't really there, and the speed isn't really there. So we thought that if we can create a protocol that actually supports targeted financial applications and that has these improvements that we saw were possible, then we can have a better system for decentralized finance. And that was the germ of the idea. Is it Adam? You muted, Adam.
I'd say that definitely a couple of years ago, the environment was such where essentially smart contracts were this like amorphous thing. Although if you went on like the forums, Ethereum or whatever it is, even Bitcoin forums, smart contracts were being referred to like financial escrow mechanisms. Back in 2016, people were like thinking of smart contracts as like Uber on the blockchain, Facebook on the blockchain, and I think that a big part of the premise was that all these things would fade out once people realize that there really isn't a need to do these kind of things on a blockchain. And I think that we maybe in some extent predicted that need. And now you obviously see in the market, ERC20 is like the only thing that's actually caught on. and we just said that the blockchain is only going to be used for finance. So why don't we just create something purpose built for that rather than something that can be like a jack of all trades, master of none? Ash, do you have any thoughts you'd like to add?
Yeah, I'd like to add, although we foresaw that the only real use case, the major use case of blockchain is going to be for finance, the innovation that we saw with Bitcoin was that we finally had a decentralized protocol which allowed us to have censorship resistance. So if you look at other decentralized protocols, all of them exist because they needed some kind of censorship resistance. If you look at something like BitTorrent, there were other file sharing protocols before BitTorrent, but none of them were fully decentralized and all of them got taken down by authorities. The use of something that is decentralized is the ability to resist censorship. In the use case of finance, one of the use cases is to be able to resist censorship in the form of regulation. There are very many restrictions on what can and can't be done in the world of finance at the moment. And a truly decentralized protocol will allow us to do things that were not previously.
I agree with Ash on that point. I think that, you see today that essentially, I kind of like to explain it in relationships like YouTube to like creating a TV show, prior to YouTube and creating one once you had the internet. So previously you'd have to go through the FCC and have to go through all these regulations, and the overhead to create a new piece of content was very high. And all of a sudden, once YouTube brought that barrier to entry a lot lower, then it was very easy for the market to compete on a free basis. Good content was consumed and bad content wasn't. And it wasn't based on who you knew or how you got there. It was based on how good what you were making was and how much the market actually required it. And I think that that's something that's been missing from the world of finance. And I think that, that's something that we're going to deliver, where everything's going to be based on merit, not based on connections and high barriers to entry. So that's my last thoughts for the first question. To the next question. So what made you create Zen Protocol I'm sorry, can you define Zen Protocol in one sentence? So my personal take on that is I'd say that essentially we're a non-virtual machine-based blockchain architecture that's purpose-built for finance. What do I mean by that? So today, all the blockchains are essentially like born or the child of essentially two families, I'd say, Bitcoin or Ethereum. And so like if you have whatever Litecoin, even Monero, Zcash, those kind of things are all Bitcoin forks. And then you have Ethereum and Neo and a lot of other things that are all also forks. But essentially, we're like, I see it as the third architecture, where we've created an entirely new system that works in an entirely different way. And yeah, that's essentially in a nutshell. Nathan and Ash, do you have any comments?
Yeah, there are things that are blockchains as well that are trying to be blockchains. So something where you have whatever contract you want, but it doesn't actually get validated by like a decentralized anonymous group of people. So like that, they're not blockchains. They're not decentralized. You might as well just be using Amazon Web Server or paying someone to do your computation for you. It doesn't give you the same assurance and the same censorship resistance. Yeah, like the Zen protocol is like a fairly new, like different sort of architecture. You don't have like a single computer like with Ethereum. You don't have sort of these like isolated scripts like with Bitcoin. It's like flirting. We've got these agents, these kind of sort of self-contained computers that go off and like do their own stuff on the blockchain. Yeah, it's actually easier to work with building contracts or like issuing assets or stuff like that, it's a much smoother experience than like trying to like address like locations in like a single word computer, or like trying to like grapple with something that like wasn't really built for like smart contracting abilities.
Thank you. Okay, so to the next question. How much time do you think will pass before Zen protocol will be acknowledged by the world of finance and banks? Ash or Nathan, would any of you like to comment? And I'm also getting feedback that, Nathan, your connection may not be the best. But any of you want to comment on that?
So in response to adoption from banks, in terms of usability for banks and financial institutions, our smart contract language is very similar to other functional languages which are pervasive within financial institutions. They use them because they're very performant, but also very safe. It's very difficult to make mistakes in them. People coming from the financial sector will find our tools relatively familiar, and so it'll be relatively easy for them to start using them. Similarly, this will present an opportunity for them in that there are classes of assets that are possible on Zen protocol that are not possible in the traditional world, that it's not possible to trade in the traditional world. So I think we're going to see, I think we are going to see usage in the financial sector and in finance. Whether or not it's directly from banks, I'm not sure, but certainly from traders, anyone interested in taking part in the financial system, more or less.
I agree. I think that actually right now we're quite in a good position, because at the end of the day, it's a nice kind of combination here where we have the protocol understanding, but also that we've always targeted this one specific use case. So we're more than able to go and approach large institutions or governments or whatever the thing may be, to go after them and say, hey guys, if you want to use a blockchain, we are the guys that can do it. Sure, you have things like Ethereum that are out there, but it's very hard to come in and talk with the Ethereum team right now and have them actually build something at the protocol level for you. That's something that we can offer, and then that's essentially a very good opening to actually have a line of connection with these kind of large organizations. So I think based on that, it may be sooner than we think. But yeah, I think it definitely in the next couple of years, I'd say it's more than reasonable to assume that something like that should happen. Nathan, any thoughts on that?
Well, it depends on what the services are. The base layer protocol is neutral with respect to banks or other parties. It's designed to be open to anyone to access. That's what and that goes whether you're an established institution or like a developer working in your garage. From the point of view of the things that you can put on the protocol, I think there are going to be some things in there that will be interesting to banks and to financial institutions. And there'll be a learning period for them. I think it's going on already. But yeah, I'm pretty optimistic. We'll see interest from established players.
So to the next question. When are you planning to launch the oracles that are listed on our alpha.zenprotocol.com website? Nathan, Ash, any thoughts on that?
Yes, so the oracles listed on our alpha site are things that anyone could put those up. Anyone could act as an oracle for those data sets. It'll be possible to run an oracle immediately after Genesis. If you want to start running an oracle, you can just do that.
Nathan?
mean, if you look at the data that's actually in our alpha, like they're just examples. But stuff like stock data, stock prices, or currency prices, or any sort of information, like there's no real restriction on that. It's just a question of do I trust the guy who's providing this information? And yeah, that's something that you're going to see more of. Like post-Genesis is ways of authenticating like the data provider and that sort of security. But in terms of like the base protocol of like using Oracle information, it's usable. It's not going to be difficult to do post-Genesis.
I'd say that about those things, about the oracles, essentially it depends on the provider. So I'm just reading off the list here that we put up: Infinio, Bloomberg, Open Weather Map, Kraken, FlightAware, and Poloniex. So some of those are going to have easier APIs to work with at a technical level, and some of them are going to have essentially also better user terms. So there's potentially an issue where, let's say, Bloomberg normally sells you a license to user data for a single user, but this kind of blockchain model where the Oracle is then selling it on to other users is something that's undefined. I don't think that's a very big deal because data latency is usually free anyway. So data that's like delayed by a minute or two is usually kind of free either way. But I think that shouldn't be too big an issue, but it may be one just from kind of legal stuff. By implementing it, so the major mechanism here is you're taking this data, you're pulling it from an API, you're sorting it into this kind of Oracle data structure, and then you're pushing it to the blockchain based on the need. So creating that mechanism we've already done, and I think that we'll start actually having the oracles running on the platform within a few weeks after we launch our Genesis, at least one or two of them to get started, is my prediction. But not necessarily all of them. So, I mean, I'm looking forward to Infinio, I think, is a very big one, which we're already in talks with, and hopefully we can get FlightAware and a couple of those things on board as well. I think that's the end for that question, unless anyone else has anything to add. Nope. Okay. Do you have any future projects related to crypto? Okay. Nathan, Ash, anything you'd like to say?
No, I don't have any future projects related to crypto. Ash, do you have any future projects related?
No, not really beyond anything that's related directly to them. There are various like little peripheral things I might be interested in working on, but nothing significant. Like my main interest at the moment is developing, maintaining Zen. We would like to move towards more of an open source, so more community-led development.
About that.
Yeah. Certainly, we don't want to be the only people working on Zen protocol, but I do nevertheless, believe in it very strongly, and I want to keep working on it. Like, I spent a lot of my own time on this. Naturally, I want to see that it continues. So, yeah, I think I'll be maintaining this for a long time.
Perhaps we didn't. I suspect maybe the guy was asking if there's any crypto projects running on us, or if we're going to have any, let's say, vertically integrated businesses kind of working with Zen that are crypto related. Not sure, but it sounds like maybe I'm just misinterpreting the question. So I'm going to move on. So about the next question here is, when do you plan to be ready to accept open source contributions and contributors, and how do you foresee that working? Again, Nathan, Ash, any comments?
We already are. If you look at our GitHub, it's a bit scattered over the place. If you look at our front-end development, on GitHub, you'll see that we're already taking merge requests. Thank you, Patrick, by the way. He's quite a serious contributor. But right now we're in an open development mode. Right? You can go to our repositories and see what we're doing. And we will look at your pull requests. We will merge your stuff. And we're very, very happy for you to jump in and start working on it. If there's anything in the code that you think is unclear or you think that is wrong, please open an issue as well. That's also very useful thing to help develop the protocol.
I'll add that yeah, I think that we're changing our license at the end of the month at our release. So yeah, we're definitely looking forward to get external developers. I kind of see this. We'd want to go down the same path that previous projects have gone down, more like Bitcoin rather than, let's say, Ethereum. As in, eventually, it shouldn't be clear, as far as I'm concerned, that we have ownership over what's going on. But that's a process that may take a few years. But definitely, I'd want the open source community to make up the majority of it, majority of development within, let's say, a year or so. Is what I would be looking forward to. So yeah, that's I guess the rest of what I have to say. So to the next question, do you plan on cooperating with other ICOs? So I guess, like always, I'll start out by saying, Nathan or Ash, do you have anything to say about that?
Okay, so there are companies who want to issue assets on Zen Protocol, like Finex, and we're working with those guys. The level of cooperation and so on will depend on what the product is and what they're doing and how much it feeds back into the Zen Protocol ecosystem as a whole. And we're assessing things individually on that basis.
So what I have to say about that is, obviously, the first few projects are going to be asking for things that are, let's say, a common denominator between all use cases on Zen. So with those, we're going to be working more closely just because we have less stuff done at this point that they would need. And it's also the first feedback covers a large base of, let's say, the common denominator. So the first few projects we want to be very involved with. And then going forward, I guess we would be less and less necessary. Although at the same time, I don't think that, personally, I want to have a hands-off approach to it. Meaning that I think that in the past, what we saw happen is essentially Ethereum's strategy was saying, well, it's going to be good for everything. And there was no criticism, no comment on what's going on what thing is well-suited or not well-suited for. It's just like a free-for-all and open for interpretation, which, while we're not going to be able to censor anything or I don't want to necessarily give my blessing to everything on the platform, I do want to say that I think that there needs to be a good fit, a good reason for the thing to be on a blockchain. And I think that most of these things, not to become a cliche or a meme, essentially at the end of the day, yeah, you want to trade these assets. You want to trade, sometimes it's a security, sometimes it's not, but you want to trade around these things of value. And I'm very interested in proactively going after, let's say, existing markets and making those assets more liquid. Essentially copying over liquidity. You can think of it like copy pasting over liquidity in the normal financial markets, bringing that over to Zen. So although I don't view that as an ICO, essentially you are creating more capital markets and greater amount of liquidity. I think the term ICO in general, just as a comment, may be a bit overused. Not everything is of the same color, I think. That's just my thoughts. Ash, do you have anything to add?
Relatively succinct.
Okay. Next question. So I think there's a mistake here. The next question would be, how how does ZP compare to ADA? So how do we compare to Cardano? So Nathan, Ash, anything you'd like?
Yeah, so I can answer this. So Cardano's architecture, they have a base layer for their currency, which currently is centralized until they figure out how their proof of stake mechanism is going to work. But until they eventually do get it working, it's going to be entirely centralized. Their smart contracting system is the second layer, which means that ADA does not actually have any smart contracting facilities built in, other than the ability to outsource that to a second layer protocol. What exactly ADA is, or Cardano is designed to do, is relatively unclear. If you hear the Cardano team talk about it, they seem to believe it's one thing that will do everything. We've heard that many times before, particularly with things like Ethereum, when we've seen that it's going to be unsuitable. If you want to be good at something, you have to design specifically for it. And at the moment, Cardano is a relatively poor cryptocurrency, if you'll even call it that. It's not a decentralized smart contracting platform and will not be. Certainly not a platform for finance. So in terms of comparison, it's apples and oranges. Our project goals are very different to whatever Cardano's goals are. We're very focused on enabling a particular use case. I suppose the major similarities between the projects would be that we both have a high focus on research and correctness, security. But that's more or less where it ends, I think.
Yeah, I'd say that's well said, Ash. I also think that is like the truth. That's essentially Cardano comes and they say, we're a research facility. We're not necessarily minded to do one specific thing. I think that, the pitch in the Asian markets was like they're going to do a gambling project. They have some sort of focus on gambling, I think, if I understood correctly, from what I heard. But at the end of the day, I think the strategy is like we're gonna have a group of strong people and try to just copy over, other use cases or what we see evolves, or try to like Lego together the best blockchain in the future. And I think that's kind of their strategy. And I'd even give them that I think that they're maybe well positioned to do it due to the amount of publicity the founders have, the amount of capital that they have. But I also don't think that that's necessarily the winning horse, because a lot of times when you have a lot of money and a lot of smart people in a room, not a lot comes out of there, which is kind of weird. But sometimes that actually happens when you're not necessarily goal-oriented. You can see a huge difference, let's say, between like scientific research institutes and hedge funds, where, in a hedge fund, in both places, you have a bunch of smart people in a room, but one is just like a lot more goal-based and very focused to something that's like a measurable like quantity. And I think that when you don't have that kind of measurable quantity, when you can't say this got done versus that didn't get done, when you can't benchmark things, regardless of how much money and talent you may have, you may just find yourself attritioning in a bunch of fancy confusion, I'd say. So I think that our focus on like going solely after the financial sector is a benefit in that effect. That's just my 2 cents. Nathan, do you have any thoughts?
They all have doctorates and we have master's degrees, basically. And they fly around a lot and we stay home. We saw them like last month. You've probably seen the videos. So, I got to know them. They're good guys, and their proof of stake stuff is it's fun. It's interesting. Not necessarily something I put my money in the custody of. An engineering approach. means you take things that are kind of proven to work in one way and then use them to like synthesize something that like fulfills a purpose. And we've certainly done that. So like, our proof of work stuff is an evolution of proof of work as it is right now. Our proof of cost stuff is an implementation of things that were invented a few years ago. In some cases, a refinement. Yeah, and that means that most of our effort has been in making things work smoothly, making things work well together, making things faster. Which is, it's those are achievable goals.
So if that's it, I think we can move on to the next question. Thank you, Nathan, as well. So the next question is, how does Zen protocol compare to rootstock? I'll start out by saying that while they are both focused on, they're different in technical and they're different in the way that they interface with Bitcoin. So at the Bitcoin aspect of it, I'll start out with the simpler part, which is, well, rootstock is using essentially like the blockstream sidechain technology, saying, we're going to have this federated peg. You're going to move your coins over. You're going to take your BTC. You're going to switch that to RTC or RBTC, their rootstock Bitcoins, and then you're going to be able to use these Bitcoins in essentially a more optimized version of the Ethereum platform. So this like the same architecture. But yeah, that's what they're doing. I'd say it's kind of, I'm not trying to knock them here, but I'd say that it seems to me that that's like a relatively like a multi-sig held wallet that essentially operates, and then I put it at EVM, let's say on my server. That seems like a relatively straightforward thing to do. I don't understand what a lot of the talk is about. Again, like I'm as a Bitcoiner, like I'm very happy to see people go after the goal of trying to increase the amount of utility that Bitcoins have and increase Bitcoin's competitiveness with other platforms. I'm not trying to sound ungrateful or disparage them in any way. I'm just saying that at the end of the day, that's to me what it seems like a multi-sig wallet with an EVM on a server. In our case, right, I think that our platform is more decentralized, and the way that we touch with Bitcoin is more in, let's say, it's in a different way. So essentially, it's by putting Bitcoin's consensus into our blockchain, and then by doing that, you essentially can create transactions. Contracts that are dependent on an event that happened in Bitcoin. So, for example, I can say, if these, maybe I want to write an insurance contract that some exchange doesn't steal your money. So I'll say that if this exchange that has Bitcoin and moves all his money in 1 second, maybe this isn't the best example, but let's just say for argument's sake, if they move all their money in one block, then you get a payout. Or I could say that if you send Bitcoin to this address, I'm going to sell you this option, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that that's a way we integrate with Bitcoin, which is different. And I also think that unlike rootstock, the thing we have is we have an entirely different architecture, which I think that we've done a very poor job of explaining. And I think that Nathan and Ash should also pitch into this later, maybe trying to crystallize this. But if you think of it, whereas Bitcoin has like a stack model, so you don't have recursion, you don't have loops, and that enables you to estimate the transaction cost by looking at the size, the byte size of a transaction. So you can say, if this weighs a kilobyte, then it'll take me this long to validate. That's how Bitcoin works. And with Ethereum, you have they said, well, we want to have recursion, we want to have loops, and how do you get to do that? Because once you have recursion and loops, you can no longer use the size of something to estimate how much time it's going to take you to validate, and therefore you can no longer use the size of something to say how much the transaction fee should be. So their solution to that was having this gas system, but the gas system also is like this. That's like the EVM, and then what you essentially have is this situation where everything runs in an interpreted and serial manner. That's how things are executed. Versus Zen, where Zen says, well, we want to have the more enhanced functionality that Ethereum has, and being able to program in a better language, while at the same time not having to make any sacrifices in the technical design of the thing. And so what we did, what essentially Ash and Nathan have been working hard on is and have created, is a mechanism where you can prove ahead of time how much it's going to take to execute a contract. And by doing that, the big benefit you get is you don't need an EVM. So you can compile everything and you can execute everything in parallel, and thus resulting in a much better system inherently at the technical level than what Rootstock has. But I think that maybe Nathan and Ash have things to add that would be a lot better, more eloquent than what I did.
Okay, yeah. I understand what Rootstock was last year pretty well. Its own blockchain, but everything on that blockchain comes via this federation, like this group of authorized people. So it is just multi-sig in terms of putting it on. And yeah, at the time I said, well, why don't you just like have that group run a server? It's the same security. It's exactly the same security. They control everything that goes in or off it. So just let them manage it as well. It'll be much cheaper. And since then, I've heard other stuff about them, like they're selling tokens now or something. I don't know, but I think we're further away from Rootstock even than we were last year in terms of like what we're like. You can do federations on us, by the way, for like moving Bitcoins on and off. It's just that you can do federations that are separate from each other, or federations that have on-chain insurance, or you can do things that don't need federations, like Adam said, where I send you Bitcoin and automatically I get, you give me a token, your contract gives me a token. Stuff that doesn't happen in the Rootstock right now. So yeah, we're different there. In terms of like the gas stuff and the pay-as-you-go stuff, which is what gas is. You pay for gas as you use it. It's a kind of nasty thing about Ethereum, the Ethereum architecture, just like everything having to be serial was a nasty thing, like a design flaw in the Ethereum architecture. And I don't really get why you would take the opportunity you have of having a completely new world, if you're creating a new blockchain, and say, okay, cool, but let's just copy this one. I don't know why you do that. You should actually fix the things that are broken. And that is my opinion on Rootstock. But yeah, I look forward to seeing it, start up and people actually moving Bitcoins back and forth. It should be there should definitely be things that let you do that. I just don't think that they're going to be the premium solution for that.
Other thoughts?
Let's move on to the next question.
Excellent. So what's your comment on the recent 51% attack to proof-of-work mineable coins? Do you have any solution? Nathan and Ash?
So I imagine this is mostly talking about Verge or perhaps Zencash. These 51% attacks occurred for a few reasons. First, because these networks had a low amount of hash power. And of course, hash power is what provides a proof-of-work network with security. In the case of Verge, it was also because of a bug in there. I'm not sure what they called it. It was a multi-algorithm mining solution. There was a bug in that allowed someone to do an exploit called a time warp, where it was possible to. Most decentralized blockchains, at least based on Bitcoin, have some idea of what the network time is, which they use to calculate the difficulty, how difficult it's going to be to mine the next block. If you calculate the network time incorrectly, then it can be possible to go back in time and then the difficulties become incorrect. This is what happened to Verge. This is because of a bug in their implementation of their mining, of their consensus algorithm. It's not due to any kind of theoretical flaw in how this works. And of course, it could be made to work correctly. However, they messed it up, I suppose. Nathan, if you'd like to talk about Zencash.
Okay. Zencash, I believe, is not quite as complicated as with Verge. After the Verge attack, which was due to, as you said, Ash, like the combination of a time warp and this idea of like amplifying it by using like the fact you can just make one algorithm really weak and mine a lot of blocks just in like one algorithm. After that, it gathered some publicity, and people published tables of like how much would it cost to rent hash power, like to rent 51% of hash power and attack this coin. And there were some coins like Zencash that it wasn't very much. The cost of a 51% attack was something, in like small amounts, like a few $1,000s an hour. So someone did it. Someone transferred coins, I believe, to an exchange, and then rolled back the transactions, rolled back the blocks in which that transfer happened, because it was cheap to do, and because they not only did they get their coins back from the exchange, but they also got the value of all the coins that they mined on the Zencash network as well. So it's when you factor that in, it becomes quite cheap to attack a lot of these coins. In terms of what can you do to defend against these attacks, there are a couple of things. The algorithms you select play a role. If you are not like a big player on the particular algorithm that you're using, and there are other blockchains that are like bigger than you, and they're using the same algorithm, then you're more susceptible. One way around that is to have like ASIC mined algorithms. Of course, we can support more than one different sort of algorithm, so we kind of have our pick. The other thing you can do is merge mining. If you merge mining with Bitcoin, then it's basically not possible to do these sorts of attacks, just because the amount of hash power you're getting from the Bitcoin network or from other, like there's Litecoin merge mining as well, it is enough that you can like outweigh someone who's just renting hash power. But ultimately, you need miners. You need miners, honest miners, who will to in the long run represent a majority of your hash power. And the way towards that is making mining a reasonable thing for someone to be doing, honest mining, a reasonable thing for someone to be doing on the blockchain, more profitable than dishonest mining. Anything apart from that, like you can tell people to be careful proactively. So don't just accept like 6 confirmations. If it's a small network, I require more confirmations. But it's a dynamic process, because the blockchain is a dynamic process. The blockchain is produced by anonymous people mining it, and until you get away from that, then you are using the security assumptions, the security argument of a proof of work blockchain.
I'd like to add here that so a couple of things. That first of all, I think that 51% attacks are commonly misconceived, in that the risk here is limited to the people who, during the period of attack, so let's say the chain is rolled back by 100 blocks, it's only if I gave you, let's say, physical cash based on a transaction you sent to me in those 100 blocks that could be hurt. It's not that a 51% attack means that my coins are just going to be stolen all of a sudden if I didn't transact in them, or that transactions will be reversed if they weren't received in that time period. It's only for the coins that were sent within the time period, depending on how far back the 51% attack occurred, which is a common misconception I hear. So unless all of a sudden you received a big transaction from someone, if you're an exchange that someone deposited a few $1 million at your place, at your, and then you traded with them and sent them coins from on a different chain, it's usually not really economical for the attacker to try to reverse the transactions, because all he can do is take his money back, but he can't steal other people's money. And just something I thought was worth pointing out. I also think that in our case, we have this, Nathan started to touch on merge mining, which is a great solution. It's the one that also Satoshi proposed to bootstrap off of hash power. And I think that this is a great use case for what we were talking about with the multi-hash mining, which is not only about allowing multiple algorithms to exist, it's more about the governance mechanism here. So say, for example, that previous to the past month of hash power attacks, people said, the Zen community would say, well, it's not really important to reward merge mining because hash power isn't very important. Let's give all the coins to the DAO, to some DAO, let's say, or let's use difficulty discounts to make it effectively economically more similar to proof of stake. But then all of a sudden something like this happens. Well, now people can come in, they can vote and say, hey, we want to allocate 10 or 20% of the mining reward to merge mining to incentivize Bitcoin miners who have a high level of hash power security to secure our network. And so I think that this kind of mechanism where the coin holders can vote where the future money is going to go to is one that I think is very, I apologize for the hubris, but I think is very smart and appropriate for these blockchains, because usually the coins are just said, hey, we're going to allocate it to X or we're going to allocate it to Y, and then that's a group of people it goes to, and it doesn't matter what happens. It could be that Satoshi said, hey, the money's going to hash power, but then all of a sudden we find out that hash power isn't really securing the network, because at the end of the day, hash power, it may be over-incentivized. There may be too much hash power than what you really need. Maybe you need more funds to developer fund. Maybe you want these miners to be actually running a node, which they currently aren't. They're using pools. So you could see a divergence in the initial plan over time, and you want to remain with that flexibility in order to change based on your requirements. And I think that that's, I guess, a great example for how we would. How our multi-hash mining and the ability to change where the funds go would help us out in this kind of situation. Anything else you guys want to add before? Okay, so next question. What would we say is our team's biggest achievement to date? Ash or Nathan?
I'd say our greatest achievement is actually bringing this thing to the stage that it is now, to actually getting it to the point where it is actually working, being able to confirm our results, our hypothesis, actually seeing it do what it's supposed to do is our greatest achievement. Having a blockchain in this kind of architecture was actually discussed somewhat before. I think one of Cardano's 2016 papers mentioned using resource bounds, but they never went and did it. I don't think to date there has ever been any kind of computational system with this kind of architecture, centralized or not. It was a very ambitious project. The fact that we actually have it in this current state is a major achievement, in my opinion. Adam, Nathan, you have anything?
Yeah, I tend to agree. The other night I was going over it with Nathan. I think Nathan can put it best about how we have a different computational model. I think that's the huge achievement. Nathan, would you like to expand on that point?
Okay, so yeah, I mean the computational model is kind of the flavor of your system. So Bitcoin is like a language called Forth. It uses stacks, and Ethereum is like a late 70s microcomputer. It's like with like a really big memory space. And Zen is like functions. It's like mathematics. It's based on like a purely functional computational paradigm, meaning that everything is determined by what it does, turning inputs into transactions, and there are no like loose ends, and the cost model, the stuff that we talked about, is kind of firewalled. So the cost model gives you the checks to make sure that the blockchain works properly, and then you're in this world of like, what do I want to do? Like, what function can I write that will like have the effect that I want, that will like create the transactions I want, and you just do it. And it's really fast. The computation itself is like machine speed. We've tested it now. And the parallelizability is like really high. Unless the transactions actually depend on each other, which is kind of rare, then they can always be validated alongside each other. Meaning that a modern computer, like a multi-core modern computer, can like get through a lot of transactions on the blockchain. And yeah, like we weren't like saying, oh yeah, we need to have as many TPS, many transactions per second as possible. I have to push that number. But like for a proof of work blockchain, we're well at there. Like we're at the top level of those blockchains. That's not something you can get elsewhere. I'm setting aside those things that, like I said at the start, aren't blockchains, that aren't decentralized. Stuff where you're just effectively paying someone to like do some work for you, with someone who's not anonymous, and you don't have like and you don't have sensitive resistance, for instance. All right, doing this work in a decentralized platform is not something that other blockchains can do with the same generality that we can, and the same like multi-purpose usage.
I'd like to add to that, because a lot of other projects claim to have high TPS or high throughput for smart contracts or whatever. In order to actually be an improvement, if someone is pitching to you their blockchain and saying we've done something better, they should actually be able to show that they have indeed improved something and not just shifted some parameters around. Now, there's a lot of parameters in play here, but what we see happening a lot is new networks coming along and saying, hey, we can have much more TPS if we shift the decentralization down. If we become more centralized, we can have a lot more throughput, and that's obviously true. If you don't have any decentralization, if you're a centralized service, then you can achieve massive throughput, but you're not decentralized, and that's the point of these things. When you have projects like EOS, for example, who've just come along and said, okay, we're going to centralize everything. We're going to run something like the EVM, but centralized. And yes, you'll be able to do a lot more on it, but it will be centralized. In order to show that you've actually improved upon something, you should be able to show that you can do more at the same level of decentralization and at the same level of security. And that is a proposition that we're making, that at the same levels of decentralization, the same levels of security as something like Bitcoin or Ethereum, we can achieve greater throughput.
Yeah, I agree. I'll just to summarize my thoughts on it. It's that, it's like the third architecture. I think that's the biggest achievement. I think there's essentially, sorry for the hubris, I just think beyond like Ripple, which is a different family, let's say, of things, but you have like Bitcoin, Ethereum, and us in the code, the development of the code base, I'd say. So yeah, I'm happy to see it actually come together. Let's move on to the next question. Are you afraid of facing the national banks? Personally, not at all. I think that, by the way, if people have maybe mentioned this first time about a week ago on the Telegram group, why growth has been slow, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, in the team and also in all other ways, it's kind of been. We've had banking issues, and the banks have shut down our accounts in the past. And it's not just us. I think that they're doing it it's not only us and other players in the crypto space. I think it's everything today, it's very, very hard to deal with the banking system, because at the end of the day, they do their cost benefit analysis and they say, what's the amount of profit I'm going to make on this person, given all these new financial regulations now, and what's the amount it's going to cost me, which is quite high. And there's just all this red tape, and it's not worth the headache. So for them to do a lot of these things, or even if it is worth it, they can't get around to it. And so I think that it's like it's dying from regulation. And I'm not saying that regulation isn't necessarily appropriate, because I think that when not regulated, these banks have taken actions that have been very malicious or not considerate. For example, if a bank is acting as a retail bank, but then they're also acting as an investment bank, and they're using my funds to show that they have collateral, that they're well capitalized, and then taking these high risk bets. Well, if they lose from the bet, then they either get bailed out or I get a haircut. But if they win from the bet, well, they get all the upside, they get the bonuses. These are things that are problematic and that you need to protect yourself from. But at the end of the day, the regulation that came in place of the financial crisis was one that kind of, I think, killed them. And all this anti this law, anti that law is just really, really, I think, harpering their ability to innovate and do anything. And that's why I think I'm just bearish on the sector when you see people like us coming in and saying, okay, we don't need to deal with a lot of that stuff. Here's a system where you can build whatever you want and compete on a free basis. And I think that that's a very powerful thing that the banks are going to have to deal with. And I actually think that you're going to have a bunch of first movers who are going to come in and say, hey, we are afraid of what's happening. We do want to innovate because we're afraid of change. We don't want to be dinosaurs, and let's be the first guys to get on this. And you guys are actually around. You're not Bitcoin or Ethereum. You guys haven't. Let's say you guys are kind of fresh blood on the block, and great, we can work with you. So let's be those guys to disintermediate everyone else. I think that's what we're going to see happen. That some of the banks actually come work with us. That's just my 2 cents. Nathan, Ash, anything that? No. Okay. Next, can you explain the mechanism behind Zen Protocol's code? Nathan or Ash?
It take a little while.
Well, let's try to make it fast.
I can give you some like basics about it. It's F# code, except for our smart contracting stuff, which is mostly F*. There is basically nothing else in there. Like the front end is glued to it with some JavaScript, and it's completely built like in-house, except for some libraries, like our crypto libraries, for example. We didn't roll our own cryptography like some people have. Advantages are it's a much higher level language than C++, or which is what Bitcoin's built in. It's a much safer language than, let's say, Python, which is what the first version of Ethereum is written in. And it runs about as fast as like C# or other languages that like target the .NET platform. So in terms of like our language choice, it was pretty good. Like it's been very F# has been very good to us. F* gives us like the complicated like advanced type system that we need for our cost model and for the rest of our formal verification, by the way. But yeah, like the code base is not that hard. Like you can start getting into it really quickly. I think it's pretty well laid out. Like maybe there's a few things that can be improved always up, but like in terms of like the design and architecture, it's pretty good right now. So if you want to jump in and like start contributing, then go ahead.
Yeah, I'd say The way I look at it is the following. We have F-star, which is where contracts are written, and that's where you can prove the computational boundaries. That's how you can get rid of gas in the whole EVM. But then we take that F-star code, we extract it into F#. From there, it is compiled down into the metaphorical active contract set, or the CLR, essentially, so Microsoft system. And from there, it's just run. That's, I'd say, the mechanism. And besides that, so besides those contracts that sit there compiled and ready to operate, it's just a UTXO blockchain like Bitcoin. So you can think of it as working like Bitcoin until you have a transaction which spends a coin locked to a contract. And in that case, then either the contract is in the active set, where if it isn't in the active set, then the transaction is invalid. If it is in the active set, then it means it was previously activated in the process I began explaining at the beginning of my sentence or rant. And then essentially, so you would invoke one of these compiled contracts, and based on its result, the transaction would be considered valid or not. Anything? Thank you. Next, what would be the ticker since Zen is taken by Zencash? That is a good question. I am open to hear suggestions. There's two MOs here. You can actually say, well, anyways, you could say we will see if it's taken by Zencash, or you could say that look at something else. I don't think we've had a conclusive decision yet, but I'm more than happy even live now to hear Nathan and Ash's thoughts on.
I don't think it's a huge deal, but our protocol is called Zen Protocol. We haven't said anything about what the native token is called, so take from that week.
Ash, any thoughts for?
I'd also be very happy to leave this, to put some of this onto the community, if they'd like to provide a name they would like for the native token, or a name that they would like for a ticker to use in our wallet. Either would be acceptable. We would like to hear suggestions.
Yeah, I agree with Ash. I think it should be a community-based decision, and let them. Right now, we don't have the best mechanism, I guess, to pull. In the future, we would want to, have, let's say, coin-based votes. But right now, we're just going off of maybe not the most effective mechanisms. But anyways, yeah, I think that we should definitely hear the community's feedback on this. So I guess that's an invitation to everyone hearing this, what they think that should happen with the ticker. Okay, next question. What are your thoughts on mining centralization, and do you have any ideas how to make ZP ASIC resistant? Yeah, I have my thoughts on mining centralization I have a few. I'd say that when Satoshi initially designed the system, the assumption was that you wouldn't have this arms race and that every single computer would be acting as a node, and therefore, if you reward these miners, which should have been that each miner is a node, then by rewarding the process of mining, you're rewarding the nodes. At the end of the day, while the nodes aren't perhaps doing the security necessarily, but they are contributing to the health of the network, very much so. So I think that the problem with mining, one of the biggest issues I'd like to tackle with mining centralization is the fact that force everyone that's a miner to run a node. While this gets rid of pools, it would also, you could have smart contract mechanisms that we already have smart contracts built into the platform. So you could create a pool using a smart contract essentially. So that would eliminate the problems with variance that would hurt, let's say, the small miners. And at the same time, you could make the system, the network topography at least, a lot more decentralized. So one is making every miner also be a node. The second thing I think on about mining centralization is it's kind of an open question, so we don't know what's going to happen. I don't think it was necessarily predictable 8 years ago that you would have such a concentration of mining power in a plant in China. And the ground may change. It may be that, ASICs become a lot more decentralized. It may be but that they don't. But that's, I think, exactly the reason why we have this flexibility of the multi-hash mining mechanism, so that based on what happens, the community can take the appropriate action to mitigate any centralization risks. I don't think ASIC resistance is necessarily the path to go down, because you could be hurt by other things just as much. Anyways, that's my 2 cents. Asher, Nathan, anything?
Yeah.
And it's been adequately covered, to be honest. Non-accessible proof is a very powerful solution. It shouldn't be understated just how much better a network topology would be if all of the miners ran nodes. Having more nodes in a network is very important. The more nodes you have, the greater your propagation can be, and that means that your network can support actually greater transactions per second, greater throughput if you have better topology. So if you have more nodes, you have better topology, and if you can implement non-associable proofs, then you have more nodes. So it's highly desirable to be able to do something like that.
Okay. So I get anything else? I can read next. So to the next question. Okay. Could you please share and describe where and how you see Zen protocol in the future? This is I guess a personal question to each person, but to me, I see us first replicating the current financial system. So essentially saying to people who have crypto, you can have the same kind of services that your bank offers you. You can have much more than your bank offers you. You can have access to essentially all the tradable assets in the world to start with. And then on top of that, you can gain access to a new set of assets that only exist now due to the thing of, having a blockchain and not having to the whole 9 yards that we've repeated too many times already. So yeah, that's the way I see Zen protocol going forward. Nathan, Ash, anything else on this topic?
Personally, what I see in the future for Zen is being developed further and taking on a much larger number of financial instruments. In the future, I mean, the goal of this is to have a lot of financial instruments available, but not just that, to have it be very easy to create new financial instruments, new derivatives. That's the eventual goal, I think. We don't know what people are going to create. The field of financial engineering has been mostly restricted to banks for a very long time. It would be interesting to see what people are able to create once they have the tools to do it by themselves. So I think the eventual goal of Zen protocol is to support a wide array of, not only support a wide array of assets, but also support creating new assets from those. And I'm like, the goal is to see this happening.
Definitely, I agree. Being able to allow anyone to create flight insurance that is dependent. So if you can have like a flight insurance token together with like did it rain token, kind of link these two together, you can create more and more interesting instruments, which I think is something that definitely I'm looking forward to seeing. Nathan, any thoughts?
In the long term, I think we'll see automated asset creation. So there are more different sorts of assets that could exist than any like human being or set of human beings could ever create. And which ones you want, that you want to use. You don't necessarily know which assets you want to buy until you want to buy them, which creates a liquidity problem. Because if no one's guessed, then there won't be any liquidity for that asset. So long term, I think we'll see, like I said, this automated asset creation giving the ability to like kind of synthesize your own assets, or to have assets be created for you on the fly, depending on what it is that you want to do. Is that something that maybe could address the sorts of cases that Adam is talking about, with like the combined flight cancellation and weather derivative? So it could cover many different sorts of things that can have risk or can have potential like benefit. And yeah, I think we'll see a much wider set of things in which there's liquidity in the future.
Okay, to the next question. What makes you better than other ICOs and financial platforms? So I'm just going to say that I infer from that question that we're discussing the fact that by financial platforms, I don't think we're looking at banks and that kind of thing. Given the context of the question, I think you're maybe referring to other ICO-focused financial platforms. If that's the case, I would say that, so I'm going to address that question directly and both intuitionally. Where directly is, I'll say that we've built a new architecture. It's not just a branding thing. It's not me coming in and saying we're going to do an Ethereum fork focused on finance. It's saying that we built this, a couple of years ago. We've identified these holes in the architecture of Ethereum. For example, the fact that an ERC20 is always going to need to require Ether to be able to operate. Those kind of things. So that people are always going to have to somehow be exposed to, let's say, the price of Ethereum when doing these transactions on Ethereum. Security issues, scalability issues, all these things. We came in and we said, let's build a platform that fixes that, rather than something that either is a copycat, or I'd say most of the time these ICOs are just like another layer on top of Ethereum that's like some sort of middleware. Now, I think that middleware is important. I think at the end of the day, you want to have, for us, like our Alpha website provided you tools to create contracts, because it's important to have good tools. But I don't think that in itself is enough. So that's my thought about our difference from other ICOs. I'd also say at the intuition level, you can say that, at the end of the day, if I think that essentially what's happened recently, so I think that what's happened recently is you see that people heard, oh, this thing works to make money in an ICO. So we're going to copy that. Excuse me, guys. Someone just walked in here. My apologies. So, we're going to say we're doing finance. We're going to say we're doing this. We're going to say we're doing X, Y, Z. But I think if you look at the guys and say, did they start this before, the bubble happened? That's usually a very good indicator of what stands behind it. If it's something that was like just came up now with the crypto bubble, it's usually not going to be the most promising thing. Ash, Nathan, yes, no, shake your head.
No, let's move on.
Could elderly people who aren't good with tech be able to use Zen? Could elderly people who aren't good with tech be able to use Zen? The answer is yes. I mean, if they can use, the end goal is if they can use a bank account, they can use Zen. It should even be easier than that. I'd like to see it at the level of, if they can use Tinder, they can use Zen. But that's just my maybe pet peeve. But in the fact that, no, in the fact that like you can swipe, okay, I'm going to buy the asset. No, I'm not going to buy the asset. Buy the asset, not buy the asset. That's like the kind of level of I have a girlfriend, so that's the kind of level of complexity that I'd want to see.
Yep. So
okay,
so we covered for like just girlfriend and elderly people.
Thank you. Anyways, so could elderly people? Okay, sorry. What approximate TPS transactions per second we are looking at on Malkuth launch? Knowing that ZenP is not sacrificed to the decentralized part, I have no idea. Given your confounding variable there, Nathan or Ash, anything?
I could give you a ballpark. I mean, we did a smoke test at the end of last week that showed that if you're not doing signature verification or something, then it's like extremely fast. Like enough so it's not the bottleneck. Of course, most transactions you do have to verify a signature. So I think we'd be like more than Bitcoin because we're pushing it a bit harder than Bitcoin does. So maybe it's slightly 20 TPS before we get into too much trouble with like our current architecture. But we're not going to saturate it. We're going to have probably at least 2 major upgrades before we hit that level of utilization. But we've got lots of paper. By the way, if you're not doing like a complicated cryptography or so on, we measured 27,000 transactions per second on one core, which is just like a guesstimate, but like it shows that like we're not going to be like bottlenecked by validating transactions. So we've got plenty of room to grow there. Of course, what we don't want is to have like a huge bandwidth requirement. But like we do want it to be possible to like download the blockchain in a reasonable amount of time. But for that, you're going to see some other things coming down the line with our UTXO commitments and various tricks that let you compact down the blockchain while still having a reasonable amount of security.
I'd like to add to that. Whilst initially we should be, I mean, speaking conservatively, we should be able to achieve like 20 to 25 transactions per second. This can actually scale much further. As we introduce more advanced parallelization strategies, we should be able to achieve far greater efficiency in validating transactions. Sorry, this is flying. Far greater efficiency in validating transactions, in that we'll be able to do it across several threads. So with more advanced parallelization strategies, we'll be able to process more in the same amount of time, which will allow us to have greater TPS. So optimistically, we should be looking at in the hundreds of TPS before we start. At that point, bandwidth becomes a concern. But I would be relatively optimistic there.
I want to say that I think that both Nathan and Ash are being conservative, not only to be like technically correct, but also maybe at some point not to like to pump here. But I'd say that, in my eyes, it's never going to be a problem. Why do I say that? Like it should be, the way I see it is it should be, it's going to be a non-issue as far as I'm concerned. We'll make it whatever it needs to be to work. You'll never have a problem like what Bitcoin had or what Ethereum's having. That's just not going to happen. I think you're going to have different sets of problems. I think that Bitcoin had a problem that it didn't have support for multiple tokens. I think that Mastercoin had a problem that it was very hard to implement new kind of transaction types, which is where Ethereum came and said, well, we're going to be super focused on being programmable. And now Ethereum, due to their super focus on programmability, is having issues with security and scalability. But I don't think we're going to face any of the problems that predated us. I think that maybe we'll face new kinds of problems, and we're going to have to deal with those problems effectively. But I think that the old problems, right? I mean, hopefully, at least this time around, we'll be able to fix all the old problems correctly. As a mission goal, I'd say. Yeah, so that's my 2 cents. Next, can you briefly talk about the actual utility from an economic model's point of view of the native token within the ecosystem? Sure. So the native token has a couple of things that it does. So it's like a computation token. You need this token to activate contracts and to keep them in the active contract set. So it's like something you pay for. By the way, with us, it's not like in Bitcoin or Ethereum where you pay to create something and then it just sits there forever. With us, you have to pay for each block a contract is active. You have to pay something, and you can only use Zen tokens for that. And I think that so it's like the computational token to some effect of smart contracts in our system. So I think that's where the economic value of it is, and I also think that there's value in the fact that to some extent, you're going to have a say in what happens with the system, and that say could be used to to benefit, and to make sure that the system is going, I think, like in the right direction. It's not like you just have these tokens and there's nothing you can do. You can actually have influence. That's the goal, as far as I see it with the community here. So I'd like to say that essentially the same things that create value in other platforms would create value on ours. But that's just like the laws of, let's say, the crypto markets that people think of, and nothing, I'd say, out of the ordinary. Nathan and Ash, maybe you can articulate that a bit better, or?
The clever stuff, the valuable stuff that you want to use on our platform, it's particular to our platform, is the ability to have automated agreements to create assets, to use assets, to react to events in a censorship-resistant and decentralized way. Doing that uses contracts. Having contracts exist and capable of doing those things costs miners time and therefore money in validating and keeping stuff around in memory, and therefore the miners should be compensated for that. And therefore there is a direct sacrifice to those miners of some Zen protocol native tokens when you want to do those things. But because it's the stuff that is like special about our chain, because it's the stuff that you're actually on our chain to do, it ties the thing together. It means that you're paying for computation in exactly the thing that that miners already want, because it's what they're mining for. So that is the value of our native token.
Okay. Anything else? Ash, anything before I move on? No. Okay. Can you please list a few more use cases that you see that the Zen protocol token would enable, which aren't possible currently with current available tech? Sure. Sorry, go ahead.
I can talk about this. What's not possible with current tech, really, where we're hitting the limits is the amount of throughput we can have on decentralized networks, and in some sense the security we can achieve, but that's a softer goal. Throughput is a real challenge at the moment. We have very few actually decentralized networks at all, like maybe Bitcoin, Ethereum somewhat, and if you do want to be able to deploy an application on those, which requires a high degree of throughput, which requires a high amount of computational resource, then you are going to be hitting limits of what you can actually achieve. And it's going to be very expensive to use up a large amount of computational resource, especially on something like Ethereum. This is what we saw with CryptoKitties. Even that is not particularly computationally demanding, and yet that utilized all of the network's resources and made it very expensive to transact. Any application that requires high resource usage would see an improvement from being deployed on Zen.
Go ahead.
So just an example of what I just said. The Ethereum strategy for stuff like zero-knowledge proofs or stuff like that would be, okay, let's write a module which we'll compile ourselves and put into the Ethereum basic client, and then you'll just use that. And the same for anything else you might want to do. And the reason why they do it that way, even though they have technically a world computer that can do anything, is because it's too damn slow to write it in EVM client code. Well, with us, you could actually just write your code and compile it and have a contract that did it, and you could do that right now. It would be fast enough. That's the difference between what you can do with us and what you can do with other blockchains. You're not waiting for the masses of the blockchain to decide that your use case is important enough to code the fast path, to code put code in that everyone has to use. You write code yourself, and then you have it, and then you can use it, and it's fast. That's the advantage.
Yeah, so I think to touch on what Nathan's saying is exactly. So with us, all contracts, so long as you can prove the resource bounds. So let's, for the simplicity's sake, say all contracts get the same status of being compiled, and all tokens get the same status of being first-class tokens. Where in Ethereum, it's only certain contracts get compiled, like transaction validation or zero-knowledge proof, like validation contracts, and only one token has a certain standing. So I think it's like a bit, let's say, fair to Nathan's point, if you could think of fairness in those kind of terms. Everyone like equal opportunity. Everyone likes that saying, equal rights, equal opportunity. Anyways, so the thing is, though, I want to make this point with like actually equal opportunity, which I think is where it's actually important, very much so, is when you want to. So like right now we're looking into doing whatever let's say very big project, and this big project would be talking to users which aren't necessarily interested in crypto or Zen, more just interested in normal, let's say, currency. So the fact that you can run without having to use Zen at all, I think, is a big upside. To give you a use case that can't currently be done with current tech, let's say I want to write an ETF that holds, let's say, the S&P 500. So I'm going to hold 500 tokens in reserve, and this smart contract will say that upon the receipt of the S&P 500 ETF token, it will then send to me 500 stock tokens. So if you look at Ethereum, the way that this kind of thing would work is you'd have, let's say, there'd be the ERC20 S&P 500 ETF token, and then I would do a command saying, please transfer from here to here in that table, and it would do that. And then that contract would go and have to call 500 other stock contracts and say, please update, the ownership of Apple, the ownership of Google, the ownership of Tesla, et cetera, et cetera. That's something that obviously can't be done because it would just break the system. But with us, it's very simple. You just, you have a transaction that comes in as an input, and then you have 500 tokens going out in an output. And it's that straightforward. And I think that kind of is a real use case that shows you how the system works. And it also shows you the amount of composability, the amount of ways that you can link things together in Zen protocol in a much better way. I think other issues that you have here that we can do is you can have a lot higher level of security than you can with something like Ethereum. So I think that's important, where if I'm, let's say, writing, so long as you have code which is well tested and well reviewed and is battle tested, well, there's no problem, right? Because that's fine. Or I'm not gonna say there's no problem, but there's a lower probability of having a problem. And that's, like, let's say, the case with ERC20s, but that's fine, right? Because you had things like in Mastercoin or whatever it is saying, okay, this is a standard, we're just going to go with that standard. I think the whole point of smart contracts is that you can say, let me push the boundary, let me think of something new, let me do something new, and like take a chance. But people can trust me. They can trust that this contract is good for the bet they're making, right? Both because A, I put my collateral up, and B, that they know that the security properties are there, that the contract won't go bad on them. And so I think that having this kind of the higher security level that we have will enable the boundary of, let's say, acceptable kind of smart contracts that can be safely used to expand, and will make the system a lot more interesting. So I don't know. Sorry for the rant. That's just my 2 cents. Let's move on to the next thing. Could Zen solve the next financial crisis? I don't know if that's like a LOL. If it isn't, I'll say that hopefully one day a system like Zen could do that. Nathan Nash, any comments?
Not much of a macroeconomist. Financial crises are traumatic, but they tend to result from perhaps a natural business cycle to some extent. Certainly they may become slightly more predictable if there is freer trade and greater ability to gather information. But that's about as far as I'd want to take it.
All right, moving on. Ash, do you have anything to say?
actually. At least if we're talking about the most recent financial crisis in 2008, I think having a system where anyone can participate in trading things like derivatives might change what people consider acceptable in terms of collateralization requirements, and would also make it much easier to create instruments that could be used to hedge against a financial crisis. It was relatively difficult to obtain shorts on what were they called? CDOs, CDMs, prior to 2008. The collateralization of these instruments was also questionable. Having both the collateralization of these instruments be very open, and also having very quick access to derivatives might actually provide some mechanism that might at least slow down a financial crisis by providing I'm not sure what the word for this is, but providing additional options, additional strategies.
Yeah, I agree with Ash about that. Yes, transparency is important. We're going to try to pick up the pace here because I know it's already been a while now. So, have we heard about Veriblock? Yes, I participated on a panel with them. I know about Veriblock. It seems to be a solution kind of to a question asked earlier about hash power attacks. I think that Veriblock is actually, that may have been a great advertisement for them, if you think about it. But anyways, yes, I think it's like merge mining at the end of the day. So I've heard about them. I need to look into it more to see how that differs necessarily from merge mining or proof of existence kind of things. So that's that question. Unless, do you guys have anything quick? No. Okay, great. Where is the party on the 30th of June? Probably at my house. Don't know if it'll be on the 30th or not, but yeah, we got to definitely have a party at my place in Israel, probably, most likely. We had a few years back one of the Israeli Bitcoin meetups there, so some people know about it. Anyways, moving on to the next question. Some exchanges want to list ZenP. Will you provide help? Of course we will. We're kind of all resources right now going into finishing the Genesis block. We really very much, super much with the cherry on top, appreciate all the help that our community is giving us and very much flattered by it. And we apologize. I personally apologize if I have not been able to adequately utilize all the help that we've been receiving. And it's all very much welcomed. And yeah, definitely going to move forward to help people help us doing whatever the thing we need to get done, whether that's exchanges or whether that's other things. So we'll definitely provide help, and it's very much appreciated. Next, some fans are asking, what is your decision about scaling token/coin metrics by 100? So I think, by my knowledge, with the person who asked the question, that this question is about perhaps increasing the coin supply by 100-fold. So we'd have like 10 billion coins. Personally, I don't see anything morally wrong with it, so long as it, like, I can understand, the reason that you wouldn't want a coin to go for $100, or just from a psychological perspective, it would be a lot better. I know that even Bitcoin wallets these days, right, they're using millibits or bits, or so this psychology does matter. And if we can say, prior to going out, well, we see that maybe a starting place of, let's say, $3 is maybe too high. I think that's a legitimate concern. But I am, I'm willing to but I also know that some people see it as like maybe not so. So I think I want to hear the community's input on this matter. Nathan, Ash, any thoughts?
There's nothing wrong with calling something by a different name. If you want to refer to the kind of like the cent equivalent of like the Zen native token, then go ahead. From our point of view, it would be a little bit confusing for us to start advocating that at this point. We'll have to see how it goes and see what the actual usage, like actual language people use is around the token. But I think people generally are capable of counting and multiplying out and stuff. Like people don't need something to be a particular number to understand what it's worth. Yeah, that's about it.
Ash, any thoughts?
Yeah, personally, I personally am in favor of doing a coin split. I don't know by what factor. There is some kind of psychological aspect which we've seen. I frequently talk with people at the Bitcoin Embassy, or see people in the crypto community who seem fascinated with the idea of sub-dollar coins and tokens. Although
Any stocks?
I'm in two minds about it, because in some sense it does exploit those who are less competent, who are less familiar with how markets work, who know what a market cap is. On the other hand, markets are somewhat psychological, and it is now becoming potentially reasonable to invest in something on the basis that others will invest in it because of a sub-dollar price. So if this is influencing strategy and it's
motivation for changing it.
I think there are some strong motivations to change it. I think the best thing to do is really to leave it to the community and see what they're in favor of.
Yeah, I agree with Nathan that we shouldn't make decisions on the basis of trying to encourage people to speculate. I think that we've kind of done quite to the contrary over time, kind of much to our deficit at the end of the day. The thing I think that I hear so much of is, why aren't you being more aggressive? Why aren't you being more aggressive with your advocation techniques, let's say? But I kind of agree with Asher that there is merit to it, just in the fact that even just from like the use point of view, people don't want to see it's going to cost you 0.001 Zen to do an operation. They like to think in round numbers. I don't know, but that's just my 2 cents. Let's move on. So, okay, I think that question was answered already. The next is Zen protocol really fail-proof? I'm going to say that nothing is fail-proof. Did someone just delete that? Okay, I think nothing is fail-proof. Anyway, that's my 2 cents. But I think it's, we're doing the best we can to make it as close as possible. So anything else, Nathan, Ash, you want to add to that? Hello?
Fail-proof? No. High reliability would be hard.
Yeah, I'm about to say the exact same thing. You can have fault tolerance, you can have high reliability, you can have low risk, but you can't make something perfect. It's just not possible. But we do intend to be best in class, absolutely.
Okay, can I still buy the Zen tokens, or do I have to wait 3 weeks? So number one, just a reminder that the caps ZEN isn't that's Zencash's ticker, and to get our token, you're going to have to wait 3 weeks. So yes. Next question. In your opinion, do you think the Zen token will be dominant, or is it possible for other tokens to take that dominance? I think that's a very dependent question. If you had, let's say, from the get-go, a strong tether on the platform, I think that could perhaps take dominance. But if you have, let's say, a bunch of competing tethers, or you don't have a market leader come in quickly, then maybe it wouldn't take overtake Zen in dominance. I hope that something overtakes Zen in dominance, simply because that means that, the way I see it in the short term at least, excuse me, that means the platform is actually working, that people are actually using it beyond to just, not for just a reason to buy and sell Zen tokens. Ash, Nathan, any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think it's very desirable that Zen actually is not the dominant token on the protocol, that other people are using it, and that there are use cases that have eclipsed what the Zen token is used for, which is creating contracts. That people are doing other things on the network more frequently than creating contracts means that something very interesting is going on. I very much hope that is the case. I think if Zen is fulfilling its utility, then Zen will not be a dominant token. I think ideally there may be no dominant token. Maybe perhaps nothing will have a majority of usage. But even if something else has a majority and it is not us, that's still acceptable.
Yep. Imagine that you take a stock and you own all of the stock, and instead of selling it in an IPO, you sell it in an IPO on the Zen blockchain. Well, that could potentially result in additionally billions of dollars of that stock trading on the blockchain immediately. And then imagine that someone issues derivatives on that stock. Well, now you could be talking tens of billions, hundreds of billions of like outstanding value notionally on the Zen blockchain. And does that mean that all of that money the value is literally just being created out of nothing on the Zen blockchain? No, of course not. The value created is the value of someone owning the derivative, which is not the same thing as like the total thing, like excluding the cost of creating a derivative. So the protocol will still work properly. The incentives will still match up. And you could quite easily see a scenario where there are things very large market caps on the blockchain. In the long run, the token value, Zen native token value, is the value of doing stuff with it, the value of contract creation, and so on. That will shake out over time. But there's no particular reason to think that it will be the largest, or it won't be the largest. It depends on what people are doing on the blockchain.
Next, thank you, Nathan and Ash. Next question: how did you come up with the name Zen? Nathan, would you like to touch on that point?
Yeah, it was kind of spur of the moment, but the basic idea is that in Zen Buddhism, there's this idea of focused concentration, which is a mental discipline. And in some small way, what we're doing with our financial focus and like our kind of like engineering approach to getting these applications reflects some of that focused concentration. And that's like the genesis of the idea of the name.
Thank you. Will there be some layer 2 solution on ZenP, things like gradient plasma, DPoS side chains? I want to say yes. So definitely, I think even a few like different things that you could have happen. I think that, for example, the long-term solution will maybe not be a decentralized exchange and maybe not a centralized exchange. Maybe it's a centralized exchange where for every transaction you sign you sign something making sure that, let's say, if the exchange tries to take your money away, you can extract the money forcefully out.
Stop on this before someone does it. Let's keep that.
Yes. Yeah, good point, Ash. And I also think that like there's a lot of times where you don't need a blockchain, but what you really need is the threat deterrent. So I don't. Maybe that's even a good enough solution, right? Maybe I don't need all the time to have all my transactions be decentralized, so long as that I know in the event someone tries to essentially try to do something malicious to me, to be unfair, I have the ability to act against it without having to take them to court, but at the technical level. I think that it's the same kind of intuition that it goes behind our smart contracts, where you could, let's say, resolve something either using a multi-sig or using a smart contract. It's a deterrent. So with regards to layer 2 solutions, there's a few we've been thinking of already. I'd say that our design of having tokens as first-class citizens and each contract as its own like independent, let's say, small virtual machine, kind of like a small little microcomputer, it's kind of like a good way to partition things, and so that you can have, let's say, good side chains. I don't know, Nathan and Ash, how much you guys want to elaborate on this right now in this form. Ash, Nathan, any thoughts?
Yes. So a lot of these sidechains, things like Plasma, which are for scaling purposes, are not so necessary if you have innovations which allow you to achieve greater throughput anyway. Nevertheless, it will be possible to have sidechains on Zen, absolutely. It may actually be quite a lot easier to have sidechains on Zen, given that we don't have any shared state between contracts. If you're doing something, if you're doing something like, say, Cosmos for Ethereum, you have to be very careful about taking stuff off of the network, because you can have arbitrary dependency on the state of the EVM, which you're also copying onto a sidechain, and you then need to resolve any state conflict. So you have to be very careful to make sure there's no state conflict. If you don't have any shared state, there is no risk of state conflict, which actually makes it far more practical to do pegs.
Yep, I don't see there's any going to be any problem with doing say SPV-based pegs or like simpler sorts of a sidechain protocol. It's very simple to implement. The more advanced protocols, as Ash says, are going to have more technical risk that has to be addressed, and we're in a somewhat better position to address it than protocols that rely on like huge shared state. But there are several options, and I personally want to see some degree of competition between those options, and letting the market decide like what sorts of layer 2 protocols they want to use, if any. But we have some pretty good on-chain solutions for the first stretch. So we'll see to what extent we have demand for these layer 2 solutions.
So I think that I'll just go ahead and say that. So the following: given that you have first-class tokens, so you have different kinds of UTXOs for different tokens, you can, let's say, split up the UTXO set based on which token it's sending. You could essentially see a situation. Let's say a country wants to work on a blockchain, but they don't want to be on the blockchain really. They just want to say they're on the blockchain. How do you have this interim solution? Well, if Alice sends Bob money, no, Ash is like, no, don't tell it. Okay, we'll keep this for a later point in time. Yeah, we'll keep this for a later point in time, and we'll move on, I think, to the last and final question, which is, can you share the identities of any well-known crypto funds that have invested any buying? Okay, sure. So no one got a deep discount early round. The thing we were quite in, like, let's say, some sort of, we were quite I don't know the word I want to say, squirmish. We were quite like cheap with funds initially, and we were able to scrap together the capital necessary to put this thing together ourselves for the first like year and so, year more, like year and a half of development. So that's how we were able to get this done without having any like large initial people come in. With regards to well-known funds, I'll just share the ones that I think I've noticed that have publicly mentioned us. So you have Libertas Capital, which is a very good friend and advisor of ours, Pamir, leading that, which we're ever grateful for all the help that he's provided us over time. We have a Nirvana Capital as well, which is a great fund, also providing us a lot of help since we started. It was great meeting the guys at Consensus as well. And finally, don't know necessarily if crypto or not, but Hummingbird as well, who I think openly stated their the fact that they have Zen tokens. So that's essentially what I think we can talk about at the moment. Just because I don't want to say anything on behalf of anyone else publicly. Yeah, that's essentially it. Nathan and Ash, do you have anything to add before we finish?
Thank you very much, everyone who's been paying attention to the AUA. We're looking forward to Genesis. It's going to be good.
Yep, I agree. Thank you, guys. Thank you, everyone, for being so patient with us, and have a good day. Peace.
Later.